Well, good afternoon, everyone. A huge pleasure to be here. I've kind of got two roles this afternoon. One is to actually sort of give you some of my thinking and reaction to the amazing work you're trying to do here, and the other one's try and get you on the coaches on time. So I'm going to rattle through some material and try and hit both targets. We heard this morning about the importance of cooperatives, but how often that's hidden. And if we're looking at sustainability, the way I look at it is that your views on sustainability are about your views of how you see the world. And we live in a world where people often see it very differently. They'll look up at this little planet and say, well, it's going to be pretty hard work doing this co-op thing because we're so dominated by the other forms of enterprise around the world. And it's absolutely true. You know, there's 90 million people on that surface of that planet working for a multinational corporation. But there's 100 million people working for a cooperative in exactly the same space. Again, on that planet, we'll talk about having the dominance of the corporate shareholders. And across that world, there's 382 million people as shareholders. But there's 1 billion people that hold cooperative shares. So to me, this is about how we see the world. In fact, my favourite fact I've never delivered in this country before is if that invisible cooperative economy was a country itself in the world, that economy would be larger than the whole of the economy of Canada. And I've used that in other places, perhaps there's more resonance here. That's the scale of cooperative enterprise around the world today. And so to me, we've all got a duty, if we want to take forward ideas of sustainability, to challenge that thinking. As one of my great friends in the UK, Ed Mayo, says, I keep being told it's a dog-eat-dog world, but when did you last see a dog eat another dog? Yeah? So we've got a role in that. And certainly I've noticed none in Vancouver, much to your credit. So that, to me, is the one there. We're about actually saying the world's different to how people want to present it, and that's how we're going to take it forward. Now, we talked a bit this morning, I was delighted to hear a lot about our cooperative values. I want to go back to the roots. What I do find in talking with many Canadians, you get people say, oh, I'm tracing my roots back, etc. I've heard this number of times. Let's trace our co-op roots back, because I think it's got some real messages for Vancouver about being a sustainable city. If you want to take those roots right back for virtually all the co-ops we've got here, a big part of that will be the work of Robert Owen in getting the initial thinking going around it. But he wasn't trying to set up individual co-ops. He had a view of what a community would look like. And this is a picture from the 1820s of what he saw the perfect cooperative world would be. Villages of unity and mutual cooperation. He saw those villages having all human needs, housing, employment, agriculture, the education, the whole range together in one mutually supporting space. Now, if you want to be a sustainable city, I'd argue that's not a bad starting point there, that we need to think together about all the needs of the community we're going to serve. Of course, Owen wasn't the only one to then develop that vision. Dr. William King, working in Brighton, said, this is a great vision, but there's no way that governments will ever actually hand over enough power to people to actually make that possible. The only way to do it is to start ourselves by doing that, getting together, building small cooperative enterprises that grow and actually connect together to make that vision real. And you see those two strands of thinking then flowing into the Rochdale Pioneers, the first modern cooperative in 1844 in Britain. Now, what you see there is the absolute of those two together. They were incredibly small. You could have fitted their shop into this room many, many times over. But their ultimate aim was to create a self-supporting home colony. So in other words, once again, modern language, a sustainable community. So I think it's important for all to realise that these ideas are not new. These ideas that generations before us have worked on and tried to develop. That's the root of my own work with the Plunkett Foundation. We were created by Sir Horace Plunkett, who was the pioneer of Irish agricultural cooperation. But he lived in the tail end of the Industrial Revolution. And so what his contribution was to say that if you have massive change sweeping towards it, you have two choices. You can actually look at everything you value in the world today and wait for it to be swept away. Or you can actually take that change and begin to shape it yourself through cooperation. So he took much of the technologies that were being used by large-scale agriculture across Europe and put those in the hands of ordinary communities as cooperatives so they could actually control their own destiny within there. And again, I think another message to the world today. And this one is also a danger of us thinking, well, perhaps our messages about the dangers to the environment, etc., are ones that are relatively new to us, and therefore we're different. Well, can you imagine what you'd choose to say if you could actually say to the President of the United States about the challenges we're facing? This is what Sir Horace did in 1902 to Theodore Roosevelt, stressing the fragility of an economy based on the exploitation of natural resources. So there's nothing new in that challenges. In fact, I've heard a number of comments today here about the transition movement, and certainly very good friends of ours within the UK. And of course, one of their big roles has been to talk about the role of peak oil within that. Again, a modern phrase for us about the challenges we face in terms of exploitation. In that same letter to Roosevelt, Horace Plunkett spoke about that they were reaching a time in America of peak coal. So to me, I think respecting and learning from that past gives us strength. But we want to look about the here and now and going forwards, and how can we actually work within Vancouver to do that. And what I loved today was the range of strands you were pulling together to make that happen. And I could pick any one of those strands and get excited about them, but I'm going to pick one in particular. But before I do, just the other ones in there. The arts and culture, so often left out in cooperative thinking, but absolutely vital. And if someone says that cooperatives can't reach out and actually help to develop a richer, more diverse arts and culture in a city, I'll throw in a few examples. Plunkett and his circle produced a simple publication to inspire people for action about cooperatives. And as part of that, they reached out to unheard of writers to actually give them a first chance to be published. People like James Joyce, for instance. May have heard of him. First ever publication in the Homestead, the cooperative newsletter for Ireland. Virginia Woolf, an unknown novelist, was part of the Cooperative Women's Guild. Benjamin Britten used to teach music in the interwar years in London around that. If we look back on our cooperative history, time and time again, when the cooperative movement's at its most inspirational, it's been inspirational for people we would look back on and see as the great artists of this time. So what you're doing in Vancouver now, who knows who you'll uncover there. Housing around the world, absolutely a vital role there. Such amazing ranges of models to be found within there, meeting real need. Certainly in terms of green enterprise, the sheer diversity and imagination that we see unlocked there. And to me, it's about actually making opinion formers realise that green enterprise isn't just about the environmental credentials, it's actually about the change it brings through its cooperative structure as well. And obviously energy. The best speech I ever heard about cooperative energy, Martin Lowry, the head of the Rural Electric Co-op in America. Now, bear in mind, America, the home of capitalism, 75% of its landmass is supplied by energy from cooperatives. So let no one say that we can't actually take on the big stuff there. But I heard Martin speaking once, and he says, I'm not here to sell energy, I'm here to democratise it. Because this is what it does to your community when actually energy is something that your community owns within it. So I wish that works around well. But the one that I'd like to sort of look on is my one closest to me, which is around local food. And I had the pleasure of sitting through the local food workshop there. Very interesting compare and contrast. We run a major project in the UK run by our national lottery or funded by it called Making Local Food Work that looks at what happens when communities start to own their local food. And it was fascinating to compare and contrast. We've got different examples, much in common. I think real learnings to be had both ways around that, and certainly I'd salute all of those involved in it here. For us, I think what we've tried to do is we're on to another generation of local food and trying to get to the next. The first generation was an amazing range of individual producers creating new artisan products, rediscovering food traditions, hugely inspiring, not often working alone, often sometimes struggling to make their route there. What we've now come through a breakthrough, and I think you're at a very similar stage around it, is that food is a community issue. We want to solve it together. We don't want to be passive recipients of food from an industrialised food system. We actually want to be part of shaping what that will be. And so what we've done on Making Local Food work, alongside a whole range of amazing food and cooperative organisations that have been partners on the project, is first of all to support the various models that are going on there, some of which are very familiar to you, perhaps some of which wouldn't be. Things obviously such as community-supported agriculture, which we've learned an awful lot from North America on there. Making those existing cooperative models, like for instance the village shops that we work with, thinking about the role that local food can play in their world. If you go to the average supermarket in the UK, less than 1% of its food will have come from local producers. If you go to one of our community-owned village shops, of which there's some 300 of them, 27% of their food on average will come from local suppliers. And that achieves two things. One, it actually gives an incentive for growers to actually connect with their local communities. And two, it gives a reason for those local communities not to get in the car and drive to the supermarket, but to support cooperative retailing in their own community instead. We've also done work around how do you actually take food in the communities that haven't got access to those more advanced forms of retailing. How can we actually get buying into communities? How can we recognise the different traditions that need to be built into modern local food producing within there? And we've even actually revised some of our older cooperatives, such as, for instance, this one, which is about the home production of food, country markets. Since the 1930s, encouraging people to produce food in their home and then retail it to each other within there as well. So lots and lots of different traditions. But to me, also bringing out that creativity for what is the future. So, for instance, if you said to someone in the UK, what is a church for? They would probably tell you, well, it's a place built often in medieval times, sometimes beyond there, changed by the Victorians. And for about an hour or so each week, it gets used by a small percentage of the community for worship. And yeah, it's a fine purpose, that's what they want. What we now get people is thinking, well, actually, maybe it's the place to actually run a farmer's market. There's a bell tower for a medieval church in Kent, and you actually see that the actual stalls are in the pews within there. Now, in medieval times, the church would have been a centre of enterprise. Most churches up until the Reformation were funded by the production of church ale, where the community would actually brew ale together, sell it to each other, and that's what funded the church. We haven't put that to the new Archbishop of Canterbury, but you never know. So to me, for all of this, it's about rethinking both the resources we have and the ones we need for the future towards that goal of sustainability. Often taking a model that we're used to and actually rethinking what it might be from a community context. This is one of my cooperative heroes, Ford Hall Farm. Brother and sister, a huge danger of losing an organic farm that have been at the forefront of thinking in the UK, but they were tenant farmers about to lose their role there. So rethinking of the farm. This is now a farm with one farmer and 8,000 owners. I'm one of them, I'm proud to say. But more importantly than that, actually creating a business model where the members are so supportive of the farm, it can't produce enough product for them. The members are willing to volunteer on the farm. They will invest more to actually create new facilities on the farm. So in other words, it's working because it's community-based, because it's cooperative, completely differently to how any other farm would work. So that's been part of Making Local Food work. How do we support, learn together and encourage more to make those breakthroughs? But the second one we've started to do, and we're still on a journey of exploring, is saying what sits above that. I mean, we certainly came up in the discussions in the workshop around, well, if we're talking local food, what does that mean for Vancouver? And I can remember once sitting in a meeting with the Canadian government where one senior official pointed out that from a Canadian government perspective, it would be convenient if local could mean from Canada. Now, given the fact I work normally with a 30-mile radius, so 3.5 time zones was a bit stretching it a bit. So to us, it's about the logic of where you draw your food in from there. So part of Making Local Food work has actually been about mapping major cities and towns to actually say, where are you drawing your food in from? Where are communities reliant from with each other? And it's great to notice this. What we also say is, isn't it time cooperatively we started to manage this? isn't this the real challenge for sustainable food? To actually think, what is the cooperative way of thinking together about our food needs? So this isn't haphazard, this hasn't happened by accident. We're actually thinking, how can we make ourselves stronger together? What would the models look like that actually were about cooperation, linking together producers, communities, working with local authorities, etc.? And so as part of Making Local Food work, we actually had 6 communities starting to do this thinking, early stages in exploring. And these range from major cities such as Liverpool and Manchester down to quite small conurbations. We think any local food solution has to scale up and scale down based on the community you're within there. We're still learning, we're still exploring, it's fascinating work, but that belief there's actually something bigger emerging here. So if we want Vancouver to be a cooperative city, I think it's also thinking about what role will that cooperative approach play in the higher strategic goals within the city, as well as the enterprises in the grassroots. That's what will make it a really cooperative city. So why have I picked food? Because I just think food binds people together. It's something that generates a passion, something that excites people for them. Now, I'm sure one of the challenges will be of actually getting the city and the local government thinking around, well, actually, is this cooperative idea something that people will connect with? So just to sort of finish with throwing in a few examples from our own experience there. The first one is the last British general election was the first one ever where every major political party spoke about cooperatives in their manifestos and said how important they were and how much they would support them were they to be elected. Never happened in our history before. But there's a lesson for our discussions today in that. And that is they didn't talk about all cooperatives. Only 3 forms of co-ops appeared in every manifesto. The other ones popped in and out of them. And the 3 that appeared were saving your local village shop, saving your pub, or saving your soccer club. Now, the learning on that for all of us is these are things that communities care passionately about. There is pain if they lose them, so communities are willing to take action. And that's the strength of the cooperative movement in Vancouver. You're actually dealing with so many issues that connect with real people's lives in a way that are actually willing to give time, to give energy to, and we can provide them with cooperative models that work around the world. And that's the learning to me for the City Council, is actually saying, hang on, co-ops can actually reach out to people and connect with them in a way that we will struggle to, even with our powers, etc. Second point I'd make is imagination in communities. Always amazes me. My absolute favourite I shared with a few yesterday, but it's worth showing again here today, the village of Llanreth in Cornwall. Tiny community, probably about 1/10,000th of your size. They lost their shop. Gutted to lose it, turned to housing straight away, no commercial property available, no land to build on. It's a very, very small village. An individual would have walked away at that point. The community thought again together. And they realised there was one asset left they probably hadn't thought of individually around it. And that asset was this. I believe it's called a washroom over here. Apart from we see that, what they saw was the potential to create the village shop. A shop that would have an amazing range of local food in it, profitable shop, and would still have the facilities available at the right-hand side. Or as one of my colleagues put it, the best convenience store they'd ever seen in their lives. Another community, because I think an important part here, and if I could get one bit across from our cooperative colleagues here, it would be this idea of this is a journey, not simply a single destination. These people thought they knew the single destination. They're high up in the Yorkshire Moors on something that we call a winter. I think in Canada it's known as a small flurry. But basically they'd lost their pub. They lost their pub before several times. It would close, someone else would buy it, and they would carry on. This time it closed and it stayed shut. 6 months on, no pub, only community facility in that community. So they'd come together here to raise money through a community share issue to buy the pub. And they succeeded. So 3 months later, the pub reopened thanks to their volunteer efforts, and they've now got a successful, profitable pub. But the learning for this, and I think applies to anywhere including Vancouver, is what had happened within the next year. So in the next year, they didn't just have a successful pub, they also had a village shop. They had allotments. They had a library. In other words, what had happened is they'd learnt to believe in themselves. They'd actually learnt that if they could do one thing cooperatively, they could do anything cooperatively. And problems that they hadn't actually been on their list to start with, they now believed in themselves they could do that. And that, to me, is the cooperative message. So if there's one thing I could impart to Vancouver, one question to answer, it would actually come from another very small community, a Welsh community, who created their cooperative called Couchman, which means our valley in Welsh. And they lost their village shop, and they reopened it as a community shop. But the one that stays with me isn't the shop itself. It was the morning the shop opened, I was wandering across the shop floor with the chair of that co-op. And I said to him, well, this is a great shop. And he looked at me slightly puzzled and said, it's not a shop. Now, I was sort of standing between the baked beans and the bread at the time, so I thought, slight confusion here. But then I thought I'd got it, because it wasn't just a shop. At the same time, they'd also actually put a cafe in. They put a gas station in. They put space for visiting artists to use, space for adult education. So I thought, that's it, that's what I've got wrong. It's actually, he means there's lots of other facilities. That wasn't it, because he went on and says, it's not a shop, he said, it's what this community wants to be. And I think in that phrase, he actually captures the absolute essence, not only of his needs, but of Vancouver as a sustainable city. It's about actually having that vision that says the communities that make up this city will actually have thought through what they want their communities to be, and that cooperative model will have helped get them there. So I wish you well on that journey and look forward to seeing how you do. Thank you very much.